And sorry, I have a little bit of trouble with my next slide. There we go. National Juvenile Justice Network, just a few words about us. We lead a national movement of organizations that are state-based that advocate on behalf of youth and families to basically try to get to a fair and equitable juvenile justice system. I also want to say just up front, obviously there are a couple different kinds of media crises. There are those that are clearly opportunities for reform, such as the infamous Kids for Cash scandal, or say, for example, if you have detained youth in your community who are being maltreated, those can be clearly opportunities that can leverage for reform. There are times when you run into media crises that are really roadblocks to reform. For example, the most obvious example is when a youth under supervision kills or badly injures someone. We are mostly going to be talking about the former, the opportunities for reform, but we will be releasing a tip sheet in the next couple of weeks, which we will email to you, that will also cover a little bit about how to handle a second type of crisis. Another aspect of types of crises is that you'll find that some are of course, just complete surprises. You have no time to plan for them. And then, of course, there are those that you do have, you can anticipate, and you can plan for ahead of time. We're going to be talking a little bit about both today. So I just wanted to indicate, obviously, there's a lot of different scenarios. We can't cover them all, but I wanted to be clear about what we are going to be talking about today. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. Jim Bray is a policy and communications consultant. He's a former press secretary to the governor of Illinois. Mr. Bray has years of experience providing communications assistance to organizations working on juvenile justice reform, including 5 years of support to the MacArthur Foundation's Model for Change sites in Illinois. Jim?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving us your time and being willing to listen to us. And if you have comments and questions, we welcome those. My basic message is that we should all be prepared for the crisis that we don't know or do know is coming down our way. And it is something that the Be Prepared is something you've heard for years, and it applies in a variety of circumstances. We have Tornado Awareness Month here in Illinois. We just had some. We tell people to be prepared for tornadoes. We tell them to be prepared to be in a winter storm, of course, and how to survive an earthquake for some, and even be prepared for a nuclear war. And good luck with that. But your crisis is something that many have been through, the juvenile justice field. There's can be a crisis a week, and unlike nuclear war, there are survivors. And people who have gone through it sometimes even have improved their messaging and improved their operation, and if they responded well. One of the things that I think everyone needs to do who might be in a communications field or be a leader of an organization that could potentially have a crisis is to obviously, again, be prepared. And that preparedness includes a checklist of things that you might need to help you survive and improve. And one of those things is, if the next slide, please, Ben, is to have people who are trained to talk to the news media, and maybe that's the people on the line. And if not, you should get some training so you're able to have that ability to not be nervous when a reporter calls, be able to field questions and know what they need, and get the responses to them quickly. And there's just a great deal that goes into the not a great deal, but there's some learning curve to people who have not been in the media or not learned it on the job. And you don't want to have a crisis come and not have someone prepared to talk to the media. And once you've got them prepared to talk to the media, it's also just as important to have someone who has experience talking with them. We can all learn a lot in school and learn how to do a job, but until you've sat down and actually done it a few times, you just get better and better at it as you go along. And it's to your advantage to have not just training, but also some experience doing that. And so also need to be, in terms of the media on a daily basis, is to be quick and be honest with them. But in a crisis, you need to determine whether, just exactly what your message is, put it into a soundbite or a very short message, because a long message in a crisis response is going to be lost. You need to be brief and say it as in few words as possible. You also need to determine if an apology is in order. Is this something that needs to be done? And if it's going to be done, it should be done as early as possible. That will shorten your crisis communications period, usually. If something has gone wrong that drags out in the media for days or longer, and there's eventually an apology and things get somewhat cleared up and you're able to move on, that's one thing. But if you have a feeling that an apology is necessary, it's best to do that as quickly as possible. Show that and also explain what has gone wrong and what's going to be done to change it in the future, and the steps that you'll take to avoid a repeat. And in some cases, this is you if you're the head of an organization. In some cases, you're a communications person representing the organization. And in that case, it's part of your job is to help mold the message and help the leaders understand the need for an apology if there is indeed something to apologize for. Sometimes you can also write your message out quickly, and if you can anticipate the crisis, you know something's coming, and the next day you've got your message drafted, and you can refine it when necessary. Or even if it's a month away, you're somewhat prepared for it. And then you can deliver your message quickly and get it out there, because it used to be you would have the luxury of a few hours before you had to respond, and you have a lot of time to get your thoughts together and get the people in line and everybody understanding in your organization what your message is. But these days, with 24-hour news and social media, things are going to can quickly get out of control in a small or large media environment. There's just a lot that needs to be done to be sure that you're out there early with your own message or response, and so your voice is not lost as others are talking about whatever the communications crisis is. So you'll need to be able to get out quickly again and get phone numbers and emails of all the news media contacts at the ready in one place. That's part of your preparedness. You need to have your media list up to date and not filled with people that used to work at a station a year ago but are no longer there, because you don't want to waste time sitting on the internet trying to look up who your media are. And then you'll obviously quickly send out emails to the news media as soon as you've got your message ready. Phone calls can go to the top media people that you know you definitely want to reach, and that can be people like wire services or large dailies or large broadcasters who other smaller outlets may be listening to or paying attention to, and get them as quickly as possible. Also be prepared for cameras to arrive if it's a crisis that is going to unfold and attract some TV stations. And then that also means they're going to come in the door, and the people in your organization who may not be familiar with or used to having cameras walking in need to know ahead of time that this is going to happen, and a little bit so they're ready to welcome them and keep them at bay if necessary until you're ready to talk, but move forward with that. And then it's not just the news media. You also want to call your most important backers. It could be your funders. It could be your board of directors. They could be ex-leaders of the organization who are still in the area. It's better if they hear from you what your message is as quickly as possible rather than hearing about it on the radio. There's no guarantee that that's going to happen, but you at least give them the courtesy of a call, you or someone else in the organization. You can't reach everyone, but email is good for all your other supporters. You likely have email lists of people that receive newsletters or fund appeals, things like that. Get your full message out to them. There's a place where you have the opportunity to tell them as much as possible and not just keep it down to just a paragraph or two. You can give them your entire message and repeat it, and there's a chance that they'll be able to hear it unfiltered, which is great. Use of social media can be important, and an addition that you'll want to add to your repertoire of things to send out your message. But it's something that, in part of being prepared, you can't just start on the day that the crisis hits. You don't want to wait to that day to start a Twitter account or to begin a Facebook page. This needs to be something that you're already doing, so you've got followers who are used to hearing from you, and maximize your message that way. And if you do, don't forget to use it. It's something that's very important to you, and you need to be able to add that to the mix of messages. And again, it's an unfiltered, although short number of characters, but it can at least drive people also to your website, where they may read a longer message and get the full explanation of what you're talking about. And then don't end with all of that. You need to sit back and look to see whether the news media carried your message correctly, and make your own determination about whether there's anything that needs to be corrected in any inaccurate reports, or there maybe are things that you want to let pass. An op-ed is another possibility to have an unfiltered message that would, that's a couple of days away from the actual breaking news, but people may still be talking about it or may have heard a piece of the story, and this is your chance to get that out. And again, it's something that you can send to your supporters so they get a repeated message from you and they know that you're on top of it and that someone is trying to communicate with the public about what it is you're doing with your crisis, what steps you're taking to correct it. Also, you need to view the social media that as someone else may be tweeting about you or sending out, putting information on Facebook that you need to monitor. And if there's something that needs to be corrected on that, you have an opportunity to at least respond from time to time or get others in your network to respond for you. And then assessing your performance. You know, we all, or a lot of us receive grants or proposed grants, and we have to justify what's been done or take a look back, and you need to assess your performance just as well, whether there's money on the line or not. Did you freak out and throw stuff, or did you remain calm? And as you do that, it's part of planning for the next crisis, if there is one. You need to do a self-evaluation of if you had it all to do over again, would you do anything differently, and what would you do? And if necessary, write that down and leave it in the file for the next person that has the job when there's a crisis, you know, years away. Take a look at the communications plan that you have for your organization. Was it implemented? Did you have a communications plan for a crisis? And did you carry that out? And again, is there anything that you would want to change if you had it to do differently? And if so, make the changes.
Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate it. I actually had a question for you before we move on. Before we move on to Marie's presentation, just kind of a quick one. I appreciate what you had to say about planning. I also know, as you pointed out to me, that a lot of the organizations that we work with have very small staffs, and of course not a lot of free time. So I'm wondering, there must be some occasions when it's appropriate, in addition, I mean, this doesn't get you out of preparing, but when it's appropriate to actually call in help, call in a media consultant like you or Maria or whoever. But I mean, how do you decide that?
Well, first you need to have a relationship with a firm or a person ahead of time, I think, to know what they're capable of doing and to be sure they know about your organization. And if you have something like that you can afford, then you're able to move to them quickly and seek help. I guess it depends in part on the budget that you've got available for communications. If you've got the luxury of having somebody on retainer who does a little bit of work from month to month and is there in a crisis, that's terrific, because then they're expected to be able to drop everything else they're doing and come help you on the day that you need it. But if you don't have that, then it's more difficult, I think, to be able to go to an outside firm and explain everything you're doing. You don't really have time in most crises to explain yourself and your organization to somebody who's unfamiliar with it and expect to get a good work product, I would think. But maybe ask Marie, maybe she's got another.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. It doesn't, even if, especially if you're a small shop, that's even more of the reason to have a plan in place, because you have fewer people that can respond and react and help. To me, that just magnifies the need for preparation.
I would also say that when you're speaking to the media and you're a small shop, or maybe any size, if it's actually someone from that organization that's talking to them and is able to communicate the response, it's better than if you've hired Acme Public Relations to come in and start talking for you. Right. It looks like you're flush with money and that you've got something you've got to defend, and somebody else is doing the talking for you. The media wants to be able to get into the actual principals in the organization and hear from them.
Right. I would add one other thing to that, and that is that if you've got a really small group and a limited number of people who can talk, and you're getting requests from everywhere, and we've run into that in the past, if you can take 5 or 10 minutes and come up with a statement and send it out, fax it out, email it out to everybody so that they have something from you. Sometimes you can buy yourself a little time that way so that they have something to run with, as long as you choose your words very carefully. But that way you have one consistent, unified message that's going out to everybody, and you're controlling the message that way as well. So that's another option.
Good point, and everybody from your organization that speaks needs to follow that message.
Right.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you both. Let me introduce Marie, as you've been chatting away already. Marie Yeager of Rota Creative Services is an Emmy Award-winning marketing executive with over 30 years of experience in strategic communications, mass media, public relations, and crisis management. Her clients have included the Juvenile Law Center and the Models for Change initiative during the 2008 Kids for Cash scandal in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, which made national headlines. Marie?
Hi, and thank you very much for joining this afternoon. This is kind of I'm not used to doing a one-way discussion, so bear with me. I'm used to having a live audience when we do these trainings, so it's a little weird to be talking and not getting any feedback. It's an odd feeling. I wanted to kind of tell you a little bit about the whole Kids for Cash and how that came about, and also how we leveraged that and kind of turned it around from a crisis to a real opportunity to create some reform. Before we get right into that, one of the things I think is really important, whether it's you or somebody that you're working with, whether it's another firm that you're bringing in, is to have relationships in place with the media. If you don't, if you have never done it before, if you've never reached out to them to be a resource or have any kind of relationship with them, it's never too late to start, and you don't have to wait for it to be a crisis to do that. If you have working relationships, even if it's not a story about you, but something related where you feel you can add something or you could add some useful resources, they really, really appreciate that. You'd be surprised how being nice can get you a long way with journalists. And if you have an existing relationship with them, they're going to be a lot less likely to sandbag you when something bad really does go down. And that was really helpful with the whole Kids for Cash thing, because we already had some relationships in place, and you know, and had some respect and believability already in place. One of the things that we heard a lot in working with the Models for Change groups across the country was that getting attention for anything having to do with juvenile justice was really difficult. You know, that's not something that the mainstream media really cares about. It's not typically a sexy story that, you know, people really want to go out and make headlines about. So that's been an ongoing challenge for everybody. How do you get the public's attention? How do you get people to pay attention to this topic? Because you have a lot to say, especially if you're an advocate. But when something happens and when there's a story that can make headlines, it's great. You know, if you look at it from the viewpoint of, oh, I've got their attention. How can I make this work for me? That is the most important thing that you need to look for, is how can we get the attention, and then how can we leverage that? Because once you've got the public's attention, that's the time when you can really make a demand for change, when it gets into the headlines. Because without their attention, it's not going to happen. Most of the time, the people that you're trying to get to make change, the people that, you know, whether it's a state government official, policymakers, judges, anybody that you're trying to get, it's human nature to resist change. And typically, maintaining the status quo is a lot easier unless you make it really uncomfortable to stay the way that it was. So if something bad breaks into the headlines or there's a crisis, that is prime time to get people to change, because they're much more open to it at that particular point in time. And being able to spot those opportunities is critical. And it's really more a way of looking at something from a different angle than probably what you're used to. Most people in this business don't usually look at a crisis and say, yippee. They look at a crisis and say, oh no, close the doors and turn off the phones. And that's not the way to go. One of the things I have on the bottom there is the need for speed. And I say that because it is really, really important to get out in front of a story right from the get-go, and before the bad messages get out there first. You want to set the tone of the story and take control right from the beginning, because once the bad news gets out there and the bad numbers get out there or the bad statements, it's much harder to reel them back in, because you can't. They're everywhere. They're all over the internet. They're on social media. They're on TV. You can't pull them back. So what you want to do is plant your messages first. Some of the things that you might see in news stories that you know, that revolve around juvenile justice issues might be zero tolerance things. You know, and I think back a few weeks ago about the yeah, go ahead and put all those up. The story about the young boy in, I think it was Alabama, who streaked across the football field at halftime, and the school came down really hard on him and started making threats about having him sign up as a sex offender for life and things like that. So those kinds of zero-tolerance policies, and if something like that comes up, it's a really great time to introduce some logical thinking into the mix and make friends with those reporters and get your messages in there and talk about balanced and restorative justice, not going to the extreme, not grandstanding. It's not a time for get tough on crime messages, those kinds of things, and highlight the damage it can do. Same thing, we've seen things with dangerous, unnecessary restraints on kids, or arresting a 10-year-old and throwing them in an adult facility. And in the case of Luzerne County, it was, and the ironic thing about the Luzerne County story is that when that first broke, that was all about, initially, it was just about the kids' rights being violated, the right to counsel and some of their other legal rights. But in reality, it really wasn't until the money came into play that really broke into the headlines. And it's sad but true, is that it was the scandal and the money that really ended up getting people's attention. But knowing that really provided an opportunity, if as much as it really irritated us that people really didn't seem to care that much about the kids, it was an opportunity to really explain how things can happen with kids and the dumb mistakes that kids can make, that we all did as kids, maybe not everything they did, but certainly we made our share of mistakes as kids, and connect with people on a broader level as human beings, as parents, as people who were once kids ourselves. You need to understand, too, if you want to go ahead and flip to the next slide there. The media is like a power tool. And I often make the analogy between the difference between having a hammer and a screwdriver and, and power tools. It is a power tool that when you know how to use it and you leverage it, it can make all the difference in the world. And when there's a high-profile crisis, it's like, in some ways, it's like chum in the water for sharks, because we've got a 24-hour news cycle happening right now. They're always looking for things to cover. And if you can harness that power and use it to your advantage, you can really, really make a difference in the story that gets out there. The other thing is that even if it doesn't directly involve you, I would urge you to get involved in a discussion, because if you don't, and if there's something else going on in your community and it's somehow related to you but not directly related to you, but it's something where you have information that would be helpful, if you don't get into the conversation and if you don't join that conversation, you're allowing the misinformation to spread. And it's really important when you see things that are incorrect or wrong, or a reporter's missing a whole piece of the story, don't hesitate to suggest a different angle to the story, or send them a report with data that would be useful to help them understand what they're doing and how they can do a better job of getting the story right. That's really very important.
Marie, this is Benjamin. I just have a question about that, about stuff that doesn't directly involve you. So, for example, that case you mentioned about the kid who streaked on the football field.
Right.
I'm choosing that one because wasn't quite as notorious as, say, the Kids for Cash scandal. But something like that happens, and it gets enough attention that people, it draws outrage. But it's not, let's say it's not in your state. do you see some value then in reaching out to your local press folks about something like that to comment or offer perspective, given that they might be pulling out the wire? Okay.
Absolutely, and especially if you know that things, maybe it doesn't go to that level. Thank God it didn't get to that level. But if there are things, and you know that you've got zero tolerance policies and things happening like that in your community, and you want to head it off before it would ever reach the level. And for those of you who didn't hear about that story, the young man ended up committing suicide because he was just terrified and humiliated, and what started out as just a stupid prank ended in tragedy because of the way that it was handled by the school officials, by the police, and by the press. And I think it provides a very sad but important opportunity for all of us to take that moment and make sure that you safeguard the kids in your own community. And it's a good message to get out to school officials and police and parents and the news media, quite frankly, as well. I mean, it's something that they can all learn. Ben, did that cover?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. One of the really, really important things to remember is that policymakers, whether they're elected officials or appointed officials, really pay attention to the press. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of how closely they pay attention. They've got people in their offices who scan the press every day for, I think you're probably all familiar with Google alerts. I guarantee you they all have Google alerts set up with their own name. And so they're seeing everything that is coming in that mentions their name. They also understand that the public really reacts to the news. And the reality is, if you're trying to get a policymaker or a public official to make a change and to step out and be a leader, even if they understand exactly what you're saying, why the need for reform, whether it's to save money or to save kids or because it's more effective, the outcomes are better, all of those things, they aren't going to do it if the public doesn't support it. And that is really, really a very important, probably one of the most important things that if you take away one thing from this webinar, it's that if you want them to make change, you have to give them the cover to do it. You have to make the public aware of the need for the change, the outcomes for the change, because if you don't do that, if you don't support them in some way, shape, or form, give them the tools they need, be willing to step out in the press and engage people, they're not going to make the change if they don't feel that their constituents will support it and vote for them again. So that is really, really critical to know. Let's switch to the next slide. We're going to get into just a couple of examples, and I know if you guys have, as we go on here, I'm just going to throw a couple examples out here, and then at the end, if there are certain things questions, please feel free to send those in. This is one example of how you could leverage something that happens. If a youth is charged with assaulting a teacher, and instead of coming down hard on them and being sent away, and the school gets angry, and they are publicly criticizing the judge and the system and about the need for zero tolerance policies, there are a number of ways that you can respond to this. Let's go ahead to the next. We need to make it easier for people, and it's our job in the advocacy community and the reform community to get out in front of things and educate people who might do these kinds of things, whether it's a school board or a teacher, and you can't ever get everybody on board, realize that. But the best way to stop a crisis is to prevent it, quite frankly. And in scenarios like this, oftentimes it's purely a lack of understanding or knowledge. And I think, you can do letters to the editor or an op-ed piece like Jim had suggested, because that is you are totally in control of that message. So whatever you write gets in, and you can respond that way. And then also in terms of zero tolerance policies and the harm that they do, you need to be armed with that kind of information and understand why, that you have those things at your fingertips when you need them, and not be searching for them, when it happens. If, and again, this is an opportunity, if you look at it, to do a sidebar story and make it a much bigger story about zero tolerance, like flip it around, flip it on its head, and give them ideas for how you can make this into a different story about the damaging effects of zero tolerance, the cost to taxpayers, how much you're paying in your county or in your parish, and how much of that's going toward those things, and the better outcomes. A lot of communities are using more evidence-based programs with really great research behind them, and that's something that you can pull in and say, actually the community is going to be much safer if we go in this direction instead of that direction. But you need to be able to have that on hand. And if you do that in a way that is factual, non-critical, just from a logic standpoint, with all of the data, all of the numbers, all of the research behind it, it protects you from alienating judges, DAs, or probation officials, because they can't argue with the facts. It's not something that they're going to come back. The last thing you want to do is make an enemy, but it is also an opportunity to educate them as well. And if your comeback is facts, research, hard numbers, they can't argue with it. Let's go ahead and go to...
I would add one thing.
Yes.
And that's also to communicate that directly to the people you're criticizing. So they hear it from you, and you have or try to have a sit-down one-on-one meeting.
Good point.
I mean, not only is it a polite thing to do, but also there can be questions from the media of, well, have you told so-and-so? No, I'm just writing this critical op-ed. Well, you need to talk to them too.
Right, because you don't want to get into a public...
yeah, have a conversation.
Right. That goes a long way sometimes. And the other thing that you can do too is have, after that is have an editorial board meeting with the newspaper. Jim, you've done that, and you want to add?
No, it goes usually, in large part, goes very well, because you have an opportunity to sit down and do a back and forth for 30 minutes to 60 minutes and answer all their questions that they may have, and show them the research. Better than sending them a thick packet of material and thinking that they might flip through it. You read it to them.
Yeah, and for anybody who's not ever done an editorial board meeting, it's really just what it sounds like. You call, there's usually an editor, at the local paper, just pick up the phone and call them and say you'd like to sit down with the editorial board. We understand that this is a very important issue that you've been writing about, and you may write some more about, and we think it's really important. We have some information that would be helpful for you, and you just literally sit down around the table. It could include, you can take a couple of other people along that are, allies, and it's just a small group, and you sit around and talk about the issue so that they are better informed and better armed to do better stories moving forward. And it usually goes very well. It's simply a conversation, an educational opportunity. So let's go ahead and go to the next example.
Actually, I have a follow-up question on this. This is Benjamin again. I'm thinking about, in D.C., there is a columnist whose name at the moment escapes me, advancing age, of course, wiping it from my brain, but there's a columnist who has been very, very critical of the Department of Youth Services, basically. The folks running who've been trying to kind of overhaul their youth system, and really consistently, like on their backs, week after week. And I know that there's a point at which you say, you probably have to say, this person we're not going to convert. But I wonder about, there must be some point earlier in that process where you may run into somebody, when you try to sit down with that columnist or that reporter, and they're just not buying it for whatever reason. How do you have any advice on how to handle that?
Well, I mean, are you absolutely certain that that person has, that anybody did try to sit down with that person? I guess is the question.
I don't. I guess I just mentioned him just as an example.
Yeah.
Of somebody that I saw sort of doing, who was sort of effectively.
Right.
What you see on the internet is a troll, but in the.
Well,
so, I don't know.
Right. I've run into that a couple of times where you go into a meeting and there's somebody that is obviously, and you can tell just from their body language when you walk in, that this person is on the other side of the fence and their heels are dug in. They look like they're ready for a fight. And they may start out that way, but as the conversation moves along, and quite frankly, there's so much research out there that is just, it's irrefutable. In my book, if you go in armed to the hilt, and it's especially around an editorial board meeting where you've got a group of people, and it's not just that one reporter, and they may be part of the dialogue, but if you remain calm and very methodical, and if you know going into it that this person's going to be there, and you lay out very calmly this fact, that fact, this outcome, this research, this study, this is what it shows, and this is what it is. So, and this is the approach that you're talking about. These are the outcomes of doing that, because there's research on that side too. Why would we, in good conscience, either as a human being or as a taxpayer, want to continue to support that way of doing things? And usually there are other people in the room, and that's where, if you have allies there or even other reporters or editors there, it kind of puts a little bit of peer pressure, and that's one approach that you could take with somebody like that.
I would add, in addition to that, would be bringing in an unlikely suspect with you, somebody from law enforcement, a prosecutor or former prosecutor, because a lot of people who oppose the juvenile justice reforms have heard about research, vaguely familiar with it, and think it's biased because it was paid for by people who to come up with a position they already had. But if you bring in somebody who's actually worked it on the streets and seen it in action, I think it helps the case a lot if you've got somebody that can speak from law enforcement or a prosecutor's viewpoint, or a judge,
really good
or
point.
former judge.
Right.
That's great. Thank you.
Great point. Okay, here we go. In terms of, if you get set up to, in this example 2, where what you've been trying to do has not been successful as of yet, that's an opportunity to, I look at that as a real opportunity, because if you've got solutions that you've teed up that just have not gotten traction yet, this is a great way to get traction, because clearly it endorses and is affirmation of what you're trying to do, because you have a problem, you're trying to get it done, but here are the roadblocks to getting there. And this is what we need to do. Yes, there is a problem, and this gets back to Jim's earlier point about acknowledging a problem. Sometimes you can't walk away from if it's there, everybody can see it. Why deny it? It's there, and yes, we are trying to do it, and here's what we're going to do to change it. Here is, use it as an opportunity to garner support. I think a lot of people have a tendency when they get criticized to crawl inside a shell and not and get defensive. And that's the worst thing you can do, because if you get defensive with I guess the old phrase is with somebody who prints ink by the barrel, you lose. It's just not going to work for you. So flip it around and use it to your advantage and say, here's what we need to make the changes, and use it to put pressure on the people that you want to put pressure on. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. The Luzerne Kids for Cash scandal, I'm sure probably everybody on this call has heard something about this, the Luzerne County scandal with the judges taking the kickbacks. This, honestly, when this first rolled out 5 years ago, when we first heard about the case and started working with the press, this was the ideal opportunity to take a situation where kids who are usually in the system, in the juvenile justice system, delinquent kids, are rarely, if ever, thrust into the role of victims. They're usually the villains. And so in this case, the kids could be, there was an opportunity to put the kids out there in such a way that people felt empathy for them, where they were actually cast in the role of the victims, and it made people stop and take a look at what these kids went through and why. And once people started hearing the stories about what really happened with the kids and how minor the offenses were, it made them realize that it could have been them as kids, I think, is one of the things that I heard most often. And so in the course of, over the last couple of years, we've worked with an author and also a movie producer who recently just finished the film. It had its debut at a New York City Film Festival last weekend. And just so you're all aware, it's going to be coming out in theaters in February. And this is an ideal opportunity if you are working on the issue of zero tolerance, overuse of placement in residential facilities, shackling, school-to-prison pipeline is another one. Right to counsel is a huge issue in this, but there are a lot of different issues that come up in this film, and it's a great way to, what we've experienced so far is that people are really, really moved. Hearing it from the kids, hearing it from the families does 1,000 times more than any study, report, or survey can possibly do. It is very, very moving, and I would encourage everybody to the website, I think it's just a splash page that's up there right now, but it's going to have a full array of resources and where to go to and who to talk to within your state. So, as the film rolls out, I wouldn't hesitate to, talk about it, especially if it's coming to a theater near you. Rally some people around it, encourage people to go. It's a great asset to use for advocates right now. And with that, I'll turn it back to Ben.
Great, thank you, Maria. I appreciate it. We'll be taking questions in just a minute. I just want to let everyone know that one thing, I'll be emailing this out to you all, but it's also available on our website. There is a Models for Change innovation brief that deals with the topic we've been talking about today, specifically with respect to Luzerne County as an example. And so we'll be sending that out, but I encourage you to download it as well. We're also developing our own tip sheet as well, which incorporates the Models for Change information and ideas, as well as some other stuff that sort of handling crises that maybe aren't necessarily opportunities for reform. But we're still hard at work on that one, so we will be emailing that out to you all once we have it. And with that, I want to ask if there are questions. I have a follow-up, but I want to see if there are other questions as well. Marie, while we're waiting to see if other questions show up, I have a question for you. You spoke a little bit to me when we were preparing for this webinar about sort of how you and the Juvenile Law Center got started on this. So thinking about how you might talk about this crisis to the press. And I'm just wondering if there's anything about that experience that that you could share with these folks. I think for me, listening to you talk about it, I was struck by how much, I mean, certainly it's something that would have hit the headlines in any case, but I was struck by how much you guys actually put into it ahead of time.
Well, I mean, fortunately, well, some of it was ahead of time and some of it was really not at all, because it was, I think it was on a Friday when I met with Juvenile Law Center for the first time, and we were talking about, they had just won their, the MacArthur Effective Institutions Award, and so we were really talking about that, and this just kind of came up as a sidebar conversation about whether or not, you know, we should do some press around this, because up to that point, they had primarily focused their efforts on, you know, legal work around issues and not really so much as, you know, in terms of engaging the press around an issue. And, you know, and in the course of that conversation, Marcia mentioned that they were filing this brief with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court the following Monday or Tuesday, and should we do some press around it? And I said, well, tell me about the case, and she laid out the whole, you know, the Luzerne County story. We didn't know about the money at that time, but we knew about the kids' rights. And so, you know, we started with that, but then also really, really controlled the message right from the get-go from a planning standpoint. And we worked with the families. We asked all of the families, you know, for their own protection, you know, personally and legally, not to talk to the press unless we set up an interview for them. We media trained and screened the families so that none of them could do any harm to their own cases. And the end result of that was that if anybody wanted to talk to any of the kids, they had to go through us. And in order to have an interview with the family, they had to first hear my spiel about understanding the juvenile justice system, the goals of it, how it works, why it works, how it's supposed to work, and what went wrong. And so we really developed great relationships, great working relationships with the press, and anytime there was any new development, we didn't wait for them to call and ask us for it. We pushed it out to them proactively. So they knew that we had their backs, we understood each other and, you know, what we each wanted to do. And I mean, the end result was we had a fabulous working relationship with all of the reporters. The families were protected. They did not feel, you know, exposed. Their legal rights were protected, and it just worked fabulously.
Well, thank you.
It looks like Victoria Cam has a question. I don't know if you can unmute her or.
I'll pull up just a second. Go ahead, Victoria.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
I have a question. I am a parent advocate, and I would like to do a lot more with the media. I do a lot of social media. But I find that there's only one group that's less like than juveniles, and it's the parents of juvenile delinquents or kids in the justice system. Do you have any insight or any input on that?
And I want to understand your question completely, because I think it cut out a little bit right when you were right in the middle. Are you saying that the voices that have not been heard, even less than the kids, are the parents? Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. And so often, and of course social media gives you all the opportunities in the world to say, what's with those parents, what were they doing? And my experience is, at least my small experience, is that in a parent support group that I facilitate, we're good parents with good kids who went off the rails. That's a tough message for anyone else to hear.
Well, yeah, and actually it's funny because when you say that, it's one of the things that really has come out just even with this film, because the film features the parents too.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that the families have said is it's so great to finally have a voice. And a lot of parents feel exactly the same way that you do. And I think what gets lost in the discussion a lot of times is that, you know, our parents were decent parents too, but we still made mistakes. And most of the things that people, like it's a different environment now than it was back then. And I think that's one way that you can connect with people from a parent standpoint is that, you know, what kids used to do back then and the response to it was much more measured and more logical, and now things have changed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think kids are not so much worse now than they were back then, and neither are the parents. And the flip side to that is that there aren't a lot of resources available to parents in a community. And if you want parents to have those kinds of resources, there has to be support for those resources too.
Right. That is, you know, part of what I plan to do is to expand those resources. Just a little bit difficult, as it is for anyone involved in the juvenile justice system. So that's encouraging to hear. I really appreciate that.
If you get a chance to see the film, you'll do it. I would just encourage you even personally because you'll really connect with some of the parents in the film.
I'm looking forward to that. I've already trying to figure out how I can get a showing, particularly for parents. So that's awesome.
Keep checking the website. I think they're going to put information on there about that. That's
awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we also have Edward Sparks has his hand raised for a question. Benjamin, can you unmute him?
Sorry, yes, I was talking away there. I was muted. Yes, I just want to acknowledge it's the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for sticking with us. I'm going to unmute Edward now, but I appreciate everybody sticking with us. Edward, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we've had a tragedy in our community where a young man left a group home setting and unfortunately murdered a woman, and it was not our facility, but it was another facility that's refusing comment, but we're being called by the media because we also have that service. And I'm wondering if there's any suggestions. I've been called by several of them, and we've tried to really stress that, you know, we don't want our all youth who are in group care are not, you know, not. It isn't that kind of a situation for all of our youth, and I'm wondering if there's any suggestions on how else we might get that message across, that they're kind of wanting to create an atmosphere that all youth who are in the group home setting have the potential to do what this young man did. And I'm trying to keep it that this was a very unusual, tragic situation, but I'd welcome any comments from our speakers on that.
Jim, you want to take that one?
Well, could you clarify who's making the charge of the complaints about group homes? Is it the reporters that are trying to start, or is it a? Go ahead.
Yes, it's the reporters, particularly one of the major TV channels who is also connected to our major newspaper in Columbus. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would advise you to get your message as concise as possible and not go into any great dialogue with this person then, and to keep it short and continue to say the same thing over and over again. It could be a one-note person and no one else is going to follow him, but Marie, what do you think?
Yeah, I was just going to say pretty much the same thing. Is there are certain times where if it's not your crisis, don't make it your crisis.
That's what, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful.
And be alert, as I'm sure you already are, to the possibility that it will become a year crisis, and then you need to say more. But if it's just one reporter, one TV station.
No, it's more. It's several, and it continues. It's gone on for weeks now, so.
Yeah, and probably the reason it goes on for weeks is because people keep feeding into it. And this is
it's exactly right.
Yeah.
Are legislators talking about it, proposing changes, or?
We've heard that that might be a possibility, and some neighborhoods where particular group homes are located in are perhaps going to take some action. So yeah, it stays bubbling up for several weeks now.
Well, while you've got the time, I guess, is to look at what other jurisdictions have done when this happens in response, and see if there are, changes that can be made that are acceptable to you, that someone else could claim that they reformed and reacted to, that would not be detrimental to your folks.
Mm-hmm.
And have the research ready on anything else that you need to convince.
Yes, the research piece is really helpful.
Yeah, and look for supporters.
Yeah.
Right, and if you can reach those people, like the legislators or other people, decision makers, without going through the press, don't feed into that monster, but quell the fears of the people who could potentially, change the rules.
Right. Okay.
Spend
Thank
your
you.
effort. Yeah.
Let me ask something. This is Benjamin. Would there be any value in them talking to the neighborhood groups that are concerned?
We've been doing that, and we've in our situations we've established those relationships with the neighbors and law enforcement, but it continues in other areas, other facilities where that's becoming a problem.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could share some of your tips with them. Sounds like you've handled it well.
We hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Appreciate that. I believe we have come to the end of our time and our questions. If you do have other questions, certainly feel free to email me at njjn, and I'll see if I can get them answered. Otherwise, we thank you for your time today. I'll be emailing out the recording and the slides and the tip sheets that I mentioned. And thank you very much for attending today. And thank you, Jim and Marie, for your time. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks for
No problem.
joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.